Usually when you think about taking a test, there's this comforting expectation of precision, right?
Yeah, definitely.
It's like math. You get a piece of paper, you see 2 plus 2, and you write down 4. The teacher points at it and declares, there it is. You're mathematically proficient. It's totally visible. You can just put it in a neat little box.
Right. It's a very binary way of looking at the world, which is, well, it's why we gravitate toward it. We really crave
Yeah.
that definitive correct or incorrect validation.
Exactly. But when you step into the world of human language and communication, that simple math test completely breaks down.
Yeah.
We suddenly find ourselves navigating a diagnostic landscape that is just entirely murky.
It really is.
Because language isn't just about memorizing a dictionary, right? It's about context and tone and, survival and a messy reality. Which actually brings us to our focus today.
Right.
We're pulling together this massive stack of sources today from ETS, Global Exam, and the IIBC to figure out exactly how the TOEIC Bridge tests attempt to measure this incredibly fluid thing called communication.
And it's an ambitious goal for any assessment, honestly, because evaluating how someone interacts with a language, it requires a completely different architecture than just testing historical facts or, equations.
Yeah. And if you're trying to figure out where you stand, or say you're an educator trying to place students, you need to know how this architecture actually functions. So let's establish the baseline here. A lot of people have heard of the standard TOEIC test.
Sure.
But the TOEIC Bridge has a very different mission, doesn't it?
It does, and that distinction is super crucial. The standard TOEIC is it's often used as a gatekeeper for employment at major international firms.
Right, it's the big corporate job.
Exactly. It's this grueling 2.5-hour marathon that spans all proficiency levels up to highly advanced. And the language you encounter there is presented at a normal, often fast-paced cadence. It's dense, it's business-heavy, and frankly, it's designed to test the upper limits of your cognitive endurance in a professional setting.
Okay, so if the regular TOEIC is about proving you can survive a high-stakes, fast-paced corporate board meeting, the TOEIC Bridge feels, entirely different. Based on the documentation, this is an assessment designed specifically for beginning to lower intermediate learners.
Yes, exactly.
It's about proving you can actually navigate the city, order a sandwich, chat casually with coworkers, and, read a train schedule without panicking.
That's the exact cognitive shift.
Yeah.
The developers deliberately lowered the barrier to entry to measure foundational skills. So the redesigned TOE Bridge, which includes all 4 skills, listening, reading, speaking, and writing, is shorter. It clocks in at just under 2 hours total.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but the real mechanical difference is the input itself. The audio you listen to is intentionally slower and articulated much more clearly.
And the themes are highly grounded, right? I mean, the sources mention categories like hobbies, housing, health, and shopping. You aren't analyzing a quarterly financial report. You're literally looking at a weather forecast.
Right, which is exactly why institutions use it as a diagnostic tool rather than a final credential. Language schools and universities use the Bridge test to pinpoint exactly where a student is on their journey.
Like checking their progress.
Exactly, to identify gaps in a curriculum or to see if a learner has the foundational stability to move up to more advanced study. It is less about proving mastery and more about mapping your current coordinates.
Mapping your coordinates. I like that. That makes the Bridge name incredibly literal. You are mapping the journey to fluency. So let's break down how this test actually extracts those coordinates, starting with how you take information in the receptive skills.
Yeah, the receptive skills. They're measured in the first 2 sections, which are listening and reading. The listening test runs about 25 minutes. But rather than just throwing a wall of sound at you, it uses a very specific scaffolding technique across its 4 parts.
Scaffolding, like it builds up.
Exactly. It gradually increases your cognitive load.
I noticed that progression when looking at the sources. It doesn't just get faster, it essentially removes your safety nets.
That's a great way to put it. It begins with the visual anchors. In part 1, you look at a photograph, perhaps someone working in a kitchen. You hear 4 short spoken statements, and you just have to identify the one that matches the image.
So you might hear she is cutting up fruit, and you just match the audio to the visual evidence. It's very foundational.
But it's testing a really critical brain function.
Which is?
The ability to link a phonetic sound to a physical reality. As you move into part 2, that visual safety net vanishes entirely.
Oh, right.
You only hear a simple question like, what time is it? And you must select the most logical response from a few spoken options.
Which tests your reflex to high-frequency formulaic phrases, I guess.
Hmm.
But by the time you reach part 4, the talk section, the architecture changes again. You aren't just reacting to a single sentence anymore. You are listening to a sustained announcement, like a flight delay at an airport.
Right, and this is where working memory really comes into play. You have to hold the main ideas and the supporting details in your brain simultaneously.
Using only the spoken language as your guide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And even though the speech is slow and clear, synthesizing auditory information over time is a significantly heavier cognitive lift than just matching a sentence to a picture.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And that seamlessly brings us to the reading test. It's still receptive, you're still taking information in, but now the input is permanent text on a page. And you have 35 minutes to navigate this section.
And again, the developers use a scaling method to test different mental muscles. It starts with sentence completion. This is your classic syntax and grammar evaluation. You just have to fill in a blank based on contextual clues within a single isolated thought.
The example from the materials is great for this. You see the sentence, Maria blank for 3 hours yesterday, and your options are study, study, studied, or studying.
Right.
It's a pure mechanics check. You have to recognize that the word yesterday acts as a temporal anchor, forcing the verb into the past tense, studied.
It isolates your understanding of the rules. But the rules of grammar are static, whereas real-world reading is highly dynamic. That's why part 3 of this section, reading comprehension, introduces nonlinear texts.
Wait, unpack nonlinear for a second, because we usually think of reading as starting at the top left and finishing at the bottom right.
Well, think about how you read a menu, right? Or a train schedule, or a flyer taped to a door. You don't read them like a novel. Your eyes dart around looking for specific data points, prices, times, locations.
Oh yeah, you're skimming.
Exactly. The TOEIC Bridge tests this exact skill. It presents texts ranging from a simple 10-word public notice up to a 125-word email. And it asks you to infer implied meanings and locate specific information without reading every single word sequentially.
Okay, that makes sense. It's testing your ability to scan and extract, which is what we do like 90% of the time in daily life.
Yeah.
But here is where I have to push back a little on the whole methodology.
Right.
Both of these sections, listening and reading, are entirely multiple choice, and quite frankly, that does not mirror my actual life at all. When a friend texts me, or when a barista asks me a question, reality doesn't provide a drop-down menu of 4 perfectly formatted responses. I have to generate language from scratch.
That is the defining critique of traditional language testing, honestly. Recognizing a correct answer that is already sitting on a page utilizes a completely different neural pathway than generating original language.
Right, because identifying a word is passive, but producing it is active.
Yes. And that exact critique is why ETS modernized the TOEIC Bridge by introducing the speaking and writing tests. To get a true diagnostic map of someone's ability, you just cannot rely solely on receptive skills. You have to force them to perform.
Okay, well, let's dive into that performance, starting with the speaking test. On paper, it looks incredibly short. It's only about 15 minutes. But when you look at the structure, the density of what they're asking you to do in that 15 minutes is intense.
It is highly pressurized. You are tasked with navigating through 6 different types of verbal exercises. It begins simply enough with just reading a short text aloud.
Which feels like a warm-up, right? You're just proving you understand pronunciation and basic intonation. You aren't generating the thought yourself.
Precisely. But the cognitive demands escalate really rapidly. By the middle of the test, you encounter the listen and retell task. This is where we see true cognitive synthesis.
Yeah, the sample test illustrates this beautifully. So you have to listen to a brief audio clip. Let's say it's a company president announcing that the office is moving to a new building in the city center at the end of the month.
Okay.
Your prompt tells you to pretend your coworker was late to that meeting. You are given exactly 15 seconds to prepare and 30 seconds to speak, retelling the core of the president's message to your coworker.
Think about the mental gymnastics required there. You are acting as a human filter. You have to process the auditory input, strip away the filler, identify the core data, what is happening and when, translate that into your own vocabulary, and then physically vocalize it under a strict time limit.
Right.
You aren't parroting, you're actually translating meaning.
It's the definition of sunking on your feet. But I actually think the final speaking task is even harder. It's the make and support a recommendation task.
Oh yeah, that task is definitely the apex of the bridge test's complexity.
Because you aren't just relaying facts anymore, you are actually forming an argument. The scenario they provide in the sources is so relatable. Your friend Liz is looking for an apartment, and you are presented with 2 options on a screen.
Right, I remember that one.
Highland Apartments has one bedroom. It's relatively new, but is a 5-block walk to the train. Sunny Hills has 2 bedrooms, is much older, but is right next to the train.
And you're given 60 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to leave a voicemail for Liz. But the requirement isn't just to describe them. You must explicitly recommend one over the other and justify your choice using the data provided.
Right, you are synthesizing 2 competing data sets, making a subjective judgment, and building a persuasive structure, all while a clock is literally ticking down. That requires a pretty sophisticated grasp of comparison and transition words, even if your actual vocabulary is quite basic.
And that is the genius of the design. It measures your communicative competence, your ability to actually get a point across, rather than just checking if you memorized advanced adjectives.
Okay, so after surviving that real-time vocal pressure, we move to the writing test. I imagine this gives the test taker a bit of a cognitive reprieve simply because writing inherently allows for, drafting and editing.
It does offer a little more breathing room, yeah.
Yeah.
The writing section is allotted about 37 minutes, but it still maintains a very strict focus on functional, everyday language rather than academic essays.
The mechanics of the early writing tasks are fascinating because they feel almost like a puzzle. The very first task is build a sentence. You are given a jumbled list of words on a screen, and you literally drag and drop them to form a grammatically correct sentence.
It's a brilliant way to test syntax independently of vocabulary generation. By giving you the words, they isolate your mental model of how English sentences are basically structured. Do you know where the subject goes? The verb, the preposition.
So you're testing the blueprint, not the material.
Exactly.
And then it scales up to actual generation. They'll show you a picture like, say, a woman wiping down a kitchen cabinet and provide 2 target words like woman and clean. You have 90 seconds to construct a sentence that describes the image using those specific words.
Again, we see the removal of the safety net here. You transition from arranging given words to building a sentence around anchor words to eventually writing entirely from scratch based on a prompt.
Which leads to my absolute favorite task in the entire testing suite. It's responding to a brief message. It is undeniably authentic.
It really is.
You receive a text message from a friend named Chris. The text says, "Hope you're doing well. My sister's visiting me tomorrow, and I'm thinking of cooking something nice for her. I wonder if you have any ideas."
And the parameters dictate that you must suggest one dish you like and briefly explain how to make it. And you have exactly 8 minutes.
I know native speakers who would struggle to explain a recipe via text in under 8 minutes. But it's such a pure distillation of functional language. It's not asking you to write a persuasive essay on the macroeconomic impacts of global agriculture. It's asking, can you help a human being navigate a mundane, everyday problem? Can you give clear instructions while maintaining an informal, friendly tone?
It tests your ability to adapt your language to the social context. You wouldn't write to Chris the same way you'd write to a bank manager.
Exactly. So we've mapped the entire gauntlet now. We've looked at the mechanisms behind listening, reading, speaking, and writing. You, the listener, now understand exactly what this test demands of the brain. But the lingering question, and it's a big one, is how do you quantify this?
Ah, yes.
How do you take a voicemail about an apartment or a text message about a recipe and turn it into an objective number?
Well, the scoring methodology is where the statistical rigor of the test becomes really apparent. For the redesigned 4-skill test, ETS scores each individual section on a scale of 15 to 50.
Meaning you receive a distinct score between 15 and 50 for listening, another 15 to 50 for reading, and so on. But, a scale of 15 to 50 feels a bit arbitrary in a vacuum. Like, is 50 an A plus A? Is 15 a 0? What actually anchors those numbers to reality?
The numbers themselves are less important than what they map to. ETS uses a standard setting study to map these 15 to 50 scores directly onto the CEFR.
The Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, right?
Correct.
That's essentially the global gold standard for defining language proficiency. It breaks ability down into those A1, A2, B1 categories.
Exactly. So rather than viewing a 50 as perfect, you view the score as a threshold. For the listening test, a minimum score of 16 maps to an A1 level, which categorizes you as a basic user.
Okay.
If your score reaches 26, you cross the threshold into A2. And if you achieve a 39, you hit B1, which is the beginning of the independent user phase.
And the thresholds are slightly different depending on the skill.
Right, they are. For reading, because the mechanics of processing text differ from audio, you need a 19 to establish an A1 level, a 34 to reach A2, and a 45 to break into B1.
So synthesizing all of this, there is no such thing as passing or failing the TOEIC Bridge. You literally can't flunk it.
That's a vital realization. The exam handbook is super explicit on this point. It is a proficiency test, not an achievement test. It doesn't care if you passed a specific class. It only cares about your current capability. The institutions, so the language schools, the employers, they set their own internal cut scores based on what they actually need from you.
Because, I mean, a manager hiring someone to work in a warehouse needs a vastly different baseline of communication than a manager hiring a receptionist for a hotel.
Precisely. The test is merely the thermometer. The institution decides that the temperature is right for their needs. And to ensure the thermometer is accurate, ETS utilizes a statistical process called equating.
I saw that term in the sources. Walk us through how equating actually works in practice.
Think of equating like a currency exchange for test scores. Obviously, test questions have to change over time so people don't just memorize them.
Right.
But no matter how hard developers try, one version of a test might be infinitesimally harder than a version given, say, 6 months later. Equating is the statistical math that adjusts for those tiny variations. It ensures that a score of 30 in May represents the exact same level of language ability as a score of 30 in December, even if the questions were different.
So it normalizes the difficulty so the scale remains absolute. Well, that's really fascinating. The sources also lean heavily into the reliability metrics of the test. They cite something called the KR20 Reliability Index, noting that for listening and reading, it sits at 0.90. But, if I hear KR20 is 0.90, I need to know what that actually measures.
The KR20 is a measure of internal consistency. In simple terms, it asks, do all the questions on this test pull in the same direction?
Okay, so how unified it is.
Yeah. If a test taker is doing well in the first half of the reading section but suddenly bombing the second half, the test lacks internal consistency. A score of 0.90 is exceptionally high. It means the test is highly unified in what it's measuring. Your score won't wildly swing based on luck or poorly phrased questions.
They also measure the standard error of measurement, or SEM, which, honestly, when we are talking about human beings taking tests, might be the most important metric of all. The documentation states the SEM is about 3 scaled score points.
The best way to visualize SEM is to think of the margin of error in a political poll. When a poll says a candidate is at 50% plus or minus 3 points, it means the reality is somewhere in that range.
Right.
The TOEIC Bridge operates similarly. If you receive a score of 30, that is your observed score. But you are a human being. Maybe you didn't sleep well, or maybe you guessed lucky on one question.
Right. Your brain isn't a machine. It fluctuates.
Exactly. The SEM of 3 means that 68% of the time, your true underlying proficiency actually fluctuates in a band between 27 and 33. It's a statistical acknowledgement of human variance.
Yeah.
ETS is very clear that institutions should view scores as a reliable band of ability, not an absolute, unmoving, definitive judgment.
Though I have to say, while they acknowledge human variance in the math, the actual test day rules try to eliminate human variance entirely. The exam handbook is essentially a lockdown protocol.
Oh, the security environment is aggressively standardized.
Yeah. You cannot bring in highlighters. You cannot have a watch alarm. You cannot use scratch paper. You aren't even allowed to underline words in your own test booklet. And if you need to use the restroom, you have to physically surrender your ID to the administrator before you can step out of the room. It feels incredibly intense for a test about everyday language.
It does feel intense, I agree, but it's mathematically necessary. The validity of the equating process, the KR20, the SEM, all of those statistics instantly collapse if the testing environment isn't identical for every single person.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if someone has extra scratch paper to map out a listening task, they have an artificial cognitive advantage. The strictness isn't punitive. It's protective. It protects the integrity of the score.
It isolates the variable down to just your brain and the language. Okay, stepping back to view the whole landscape we've traversed today. We set out to decode this massive ecosystem, and the picture is incredibly clear now. The TOEIC Bridge isn't some punitive gauntlet of academic jargon.
Not at all.
It is a highly calibrated, scientifically rigorous tool designed to map your ability to survive the beautiful, messy reality of everyday human interaction.
From scanning a train schedule to leaving a voicemail about an apartment to helping your friend figure out what to cook for dinner, it measures the functional language of life.
Which is ultimately what language is for.
It is. But if we connect all this back to the broader implications of learning, testing, casual, everyday language is inherently difficult because daily conversation constantly breaks the rules.
Oh, absolutely.
It's filled with fragmented sentences, implied context, and shifting slang. It makes you wonder, As standardized tests like the TOEIC Bridge become more technologically sophisticated at measuring the messy reality of human connection through complex speaking and writing simulations, will the way we actually teach language in the classroom finally shift away from rigid textbook grammar?
Hmm.
Will it lean entirely into the chaotic, beautiful reality of how we actually speak to one another?
That is the perfect question to leave on, because at the end of the day, we aren't trying to pass a binary math test. We are just trying to wade through the muddy waters of human communication and make a connection. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and stay curious. See you next time.